The Tim Heale Podcast's Ordinary People's Extraordinary Stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Nancy. Nancy's going to tell us where and when she was born, and then she's going to describe what it was like where she grew up, the school she went to, and the education that she received. So, Nancy, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
No, your absolute pleasure. So, we can kick off then. Where were you born? We won't ask when you were born because you're a lady. So
Well, I'm happy to share that. I was born in Denver, Colorado in the U.S. 65 years ago. And a pretty standard upbringing, with the exception of my parents my father was an alcoholic, very high functioning. My mother drank heavily, also very high functioning. And
were they in the British military?
No, they weren't.
Cool. How did they learn that skill then to be?
Oh, well, my father comes from Scottish descent and my mother comes from Irish descent. So they came by it pretty naturally. And
that explains a lot.
Yep, that explains a lot. Yes. And, we had a lot of fun when I was growing up. I learned how to water ski and figure skate and snow ski. And I also learned how to walk on eggshells, because when you're living in an alcoholic household, you learn to tiptoe around and make sure that you don't upset the apple cart. So there was a lot of fun, and there was a lot of trauma, actually. So it wasn't the ordinary.
Wasn't a happy family bringing up then.
It wasn't a typical happy family. No. There were challenges, as I think there are with all families, but when you have drugs or alcohol involved, I think it definitely affects the dynamic and the level of.
Yeah, it does. It does put challenges into the mix. That's for
definitely sure. Threw challenges at me. Yeah, definitely.
So, what was the area like in Denver where you grew up?
Well, Denver used to be just a really neat town. It has grown by leaps and bounds since I was born, and now it's a very crowded city, but it's there's a lot of people do a lot of outdoor activities. Being in Colorado, we're not too far from the mountains, and so as I said, I grew up. I learned how to snow ski when I was 12 or 13, something like that, and so I did that for quite a few years, and it's an environment where it promotes outdoor activity. My parents weren't heavy into that. I didn't grow up camping or, doing a lot of outdoor activity, because of course there was their drinking that needed to take place at the same time. So, it kind of limited how much nature we really embraced. So
was it through school that you did your main activities of skiing and outdoors stuff?
Well, not really. No, I didn't I wasn't on any team sports until I got into high school. I was on a gymnastics team when I was in high school, and but all my skiing and ice skating took place on the weekends. My skating took place all by myself, pretty much, and skiing took place either with friends or with my parents. who, weren't drinking while they were skiing, but, afterwards. So
Well, got to have a little bit of après ski, I suppose.
that's right. Yes, absolutely.
And then it's not it's knowing when to stop the après ski is the problem, I guess.
That's exactly right. So my schooling was just pretty typical public education schooling, and then I went to college or university, as I think you guys say over there, for one semester, and then dropped out to get married. So
All right.
I got married.
Let's just wind you back just a little bit to your. Did you have a middle school or was it junior high? Which did you have?
Middle school. We here at the time that I was growing up, we did elementary school, and that was from first grade to sixth grade, and then middle school was from 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and then high school was 10th and 11th and 12th. And so I went all the way through in public school, 3 different schools. Well, actually 4, because I went to 2 different high schools. They changed boundary lines. And so my senior year in high school, I went to a different school. So, but I met, I've still got friends from my high school years, and actually one of my friends I met in first grade. So I've got a lot of friends, that date back to elementary school.
So what was your elementary school like? What were the teachers like at the time? Were they strict? Were they fairly easy going? Were they dynamic? Were they terrible? What sort of teachers did you have?
Well, let's see. I loved my first grade teacher. She was wonderful, very friendly and nurturing and compassionate. I liked school a lot, and I liked all my teachers, really, for the most part. There was a great science teacher in the 5th and 6th grade that I really liked, but in middle school, I don't remember any of the teachers being great or horrible. They were pretty middle of the road. And high school, same thing. There weren't too many that I was really crazy about, or any that I was that I didn't really like. So it was pretty benign. I look back and I regret not having applied myself more. But I was a good student. I wasn't a straight A student, but I was a solid B student, and, with a few A's thrown in here and there. So it was a good experience.
I was a solid D student, me. and that's when I wasn't getting E's. So did you have a particular study that you really enjoyed? What was your best subject?
That's a good question. By the time I was in high school, I really liked the social sciences, probably the psychology. We started dipping into that a little bit, and I liked that a lot, to the point where when I did go to college, I wanted to major in psychology and minor in social work, social sciences. So my thought was that I was going to be a psychologist, which isn't too far off the mark from what I'm doing now, but it, I didn't pursue it. So.
Okay. So you graduated high school.
I did.
Did you have a prom?
There was a prom. I did not go to prom. No. So I wasn't too terribly popular with the boys. So I didn't go to prom. any of my years in high school. That just wasn't part of my experience. So
Did you feel as though you missed out on it at all?
Sure. Yep. All my friends were going and I wasn't. So yeah, that was hard.
So you must have been in the minority then if you didn't manage to get to the prom.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. I think a lot of people at that point were kind of scoffing at prom. I know a lot of my friends went to prom because they were nominated for prom queen or whatever, so they had to go. They didn't really want to go. But so I don't know if I was in the minority or the majority, to be honest with you.
All right. Okay. Well, at least it saved you a few quid on a new dress and all the rest of it.
That's exactly right.
and a limousine and everything. I've seen how it all works over there.
Yep. Saved a lot of money.
So moving on then, you went to university or college. So where did you go for that?
I went to a small school in southwestern Colorado in the town of Gunnison, which is a very small town. And it was, I wasn't there very long. I met my soon-to-be husband 2 weeks before I left for college, and went to college. He helped me move in there, and while he was there that weekend, he asked me to marry him. And shockingly and surprisingly, I said, and actually probably not all that surprising, I said yes. Looking, now if you correlate the high school experience of not being invited to prom, right? And then some nice guy asking you to marry him, I took him up on the offer thinking that was the only time I would get one. And so my college experience was he visited every weekend, and I never experienced the college life because he was always around. And it was unfortunate. It was really unfortunate that I had the low self-esteem that I did at the time that created that environment within myself. And I had that little voice in the back of my head saying, this is not a good idea. And I didn't listen to it because I was...
A little Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah, because I was, just so convinced that was, the right thing to do, was to throw in with him, and that was going to be my lot in life. And I don't
guess that it wasn't.
Yeah, it was. I regret it and don't at the same time. It's one of those situations where I've learned a lot since then, and now I know why I did what I did. At the time, it was
a thing to do at the time, I guess.
Well, yeah, it was. And it was just the fact that I didn't believe in myself, and I didn't think I had any other choice, really. I didn't believe in the choices that really were at my disposal. And, it was a mind game for me.
So how long did you last at college then?
Only one semester. So from September to December.
All right. So you didn't manage to get enough points to sort of
do anything else? No. And I was not doing well in my studies anyway. So I was on probation. and because I wasn't, I wasn't interested in school at that point. Then he was the only thing that was on my mind, which was sad. So
I'm making an assumption that you got married then fairly soon after.
I did get married the following August, and we lasted about a year and a half. And by the time I turned 21, I was divorced. And, so that, was, I was divorced before the rest of my friends graduated from college.
Yeah. So did you have any kids in tow?
No, I didn't.
That's fortunate then.
Yes, it is. Very.
So what did you do next then?
Well, I went back to the store that I worked at when I was in high school and before I went to college. And then I worked in the mortgage business, and then I got a job in the oil and gas industry, and I worked there in the industry for many years, off and on, really until 2019. So I worked in the industry and then got laid off for the umpteenth time in 1996, and trained to be went to school to become an interior designer. And I did that for another 12 years, I believe, something like that, 16 years. And then went back to oil and gas because the bottom fell out of the interior design business. And so
let's just explore the oil and gas. How did you get into that in the first place, and what were you doing in it?
Well, I started out as a receptionist, and I did that with this company for, I don't know, a year or so. And then I moved into the land department, and I learned how to be a lease analyst. And I did that type of work, land administration, for many years. And
what's involved in that? Land analysis. Is that something like, you go out and you dig up a bit of dirt and you analyze it?
No, I analyze the contracts. So the oil and gas leases that were obtained in order to drill from the landowners, then I read all the clauses in the contracts and made sure that we adhered to all the requirements that we needed to adhere to, made the payments that needed to be paid, that sort of thing.
All right. So
very dry.
Was it one of the big conglomerates, or was it
No, I worked for mostly small companies. Really quite small comparatively. I never worked for any of the big
Exxon or
yeah, I never worked
or
for
Shell.
any of the big companies.
So these small companies, were they just sort of drilling outfits that were exploring?
Most of them, were exploration and development companies.
Yeah. So once they sort of hit the old Texas tea, the old the gold there, they gave it over to a big company to continue the mining of it.
No. Once we once they
struck oil,
so to speak, then we, they were exploration and development, so they always were producers, and and then we'd pay royalties on the oil that was discovered, and so on and so forth. So we didn't process the oil, we turned it over to someone else to process, but we maintained the leases, which is what I was doing.
Right. So in effect, you could have possibly done the clam pits.
Well, except I wasn't the landowner, so no. But I was the guy that was paying the clampets. So
Yeah. 'Cause, the old, where would they come from? The old Texas tea and Jed.
yep, yep,
So you the company would find somewhere that they want to go and drill on, like the Clampets bit of land, and you'd sort out the lease for them to go and do that. Is that the
right. Basically, yeah,
that's it? Got it.
yep.
Excellent.
I did paperwork.
Yeah. So you didn't go out and help the drilling or anything when they got.
No,
So you did that for quite a few years then,
I did.
and
Quite a few
and what there then? Why did you go across to interior design?
Well, like I said, I got laid off, and the company that I was working for at the time laid off so many of their staff that we all qualified to be retrained in a different industry by the state of Colorado. Um, the oil and gas industry was taking a very steep decline at the time, and so there were a lot of companies that were laying off a lot of people. And so there was a huge influx of folks hitting the unemployment, tickers. So they knew that it was going to be more advantageous to retrain all of us than it would be to pay unemployment for, to the extent that they would have to. And so I decided to go to school to become an interior designer. And I ended up being a kitchen and bath designer. So.
Oh, right. So did you have an interest in that to start with?
Oh, I did. Yeah. It was very interesting to me. I always loved, looking
you
at.
did all your own decorating and stuff like that to start with, was
so
it?
I was, I think I had a talent for it to begin with. It never occurred to me to do it professionally until I had the opportunity to be trained. With someone else was paying for it. So it was lovely to have that opportunity. And it was an incredible opportunity to learn something new.
And they obviously paid you at the same time to do it, I guess.
I was able to collect unemployment so that I could live. I had I got a part-time job, and as I was going through school, and then was hired even before I graduated with a large architectural firm.
So how long was the course then to learn how to be?
I was in school for 2 years.
Crikey.
Yeah.
So you know a bit about sort of.
I know a bit about it. Yeah.
How to design a bathroom.
Yep, I do.
Does that come down to where all the plumbing is running? And
yeah, we learn all about that and what. Yep, it's very important. So
the different materials that are used in it.
Exactly right.
And you say you did kitchens as well?
Yep, I did.
I mean, I know a thing or two about having kitchens done. I mean, we moved where we are now about 4 years ago, and it took them a year to redo the house. Every single wall and ceiling and floor had all been redone. So we had the chimney taken out. There's so much work done on this place you wouldn't believe. We're nearly there.
Yeah.
Last bit's the garden to finish off. We've just got a little bit of garden that needs a little bit of landscaping, and it's done.
Yep.
And then we can have a big party and enjoy it.
There you go. There you go. Well, there's a comic that I have on my refrigerator that says, you can either enter the gates of hell or you can remodel your house. It's kind of a toss up, It can be a very painful experience, or, if you have a good designer and a good contractor, then hopefully it can be reasonably painless. But it's a disruption like people have never.
It's the disruption that was the worst, I think, because it dragged on over a year, and there was an awful lot of reconstruction work that needed doing, especially when they took the chimney out and they had to strengthen the roof beams.
That's a That's a
Oh,
big job. That's a big
but
job.
we had some really good guys working on it, so it wasn't too
Nice.
bad. And we
Good.
were able to go away for about 4 months during the
That's
period.
really nice. Yeah, when you can
Yeah.
leave the premises and not be living through it is
Yeah.
is
So that
really advantageous.
definitely, and I would encourage anybody, if they're having it done, go away somewhere.
Yeah.
Let them get on with it.
Yep. Exactly.
So you're there. You're designing people's bathrooms. You before you left college, you got an offer of a job with a big company. So how was that through the course? Were they looking for people?
Well, a little bit. This company was looking for some people. They were I was offered an internship with them, but it was a full-time internship. Well, I guess it started out kind of part-time really because I was still in school, but it was right at the tail end. And I thought it was going along fairly well, except that it was very stressful. And it turned out that they ended up letting me go because I couldn't. I wasn't meeting their expectations, and that came as a surprise because they had just given me a bonus the week before, so I was a little taken aback.
Yeah.
Why give
Give you a
someone a
bonus and
bonus
say
if
you're
you're
not
going
up
to
to
fire them
scratch.
next week? But yeah, it was a little odd. And so I was let go from there. I went back to oil and gas for about 6 months to lick my wounds, and then jumped back into kitchen and bath design as a design tech. So
For yourself or for
no,
another
I
company?
worked for a small kitchen and bath design firm, very small mom and pop shop, and worked for them for a year, and then I moved to another um, larger company, but still fairly small, and worked for them for a year, and then went to another company that was kind of the cream of the crop in Denver, and I was with them for 5 years, and then I struck out on my own.
So what made you go out on your own then?
Well, I wanted to actually do the design work. I had been a design assistant up until that point, so I was doing all the drawings and the ordering of the appliances and cabinetry and specifying and all that stuff. And I wanted to do the design work, and in order to do that I had to leave that company, which was very hard because I really enjoyed the people that I was working with, but I was really good at what I was doing, and they didn't want me to go to the next step. They wanted to keep me where I was. So I decided to strike out on my own, and I did that for a few years until kind of the bottom fell out of the interior design. I was working with a lot of custom builders, and the economy kind of went south. That was in 2010, 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
And
8, 9, 10 was a few tough years.
yeah, so I had to go get a real job, and I went back to oil and gas. So
So going back to oil and gas then, what did you do that time?
well, I went back to the same type of work. I was a lease analyst. And the year before, I had quit drinking. So that was a huge part of my life. I followed in my parents' footsteps. And when my father committed suicide in 2007, my drinking escalated, and then in 2009 I attempted suicide myself, and as a result quit drinking, and a year later then went back into oil and gas to get back on my feet, sort of thing. So I went back doing the work that I was
good at.
Yeah. Didn't, and I, at the time I loved it. It was challenging again. I was very interested in it, and I was incredibly grateful to have been given the opportunity that I received. And I was with them for 9 years.
So what was the catalyst that encouraged you to stop drinking?
Well, I tried to kill myself. And so
clearly it didn't work.
Clearly it didn't work. But
so you was rubbish at trying to kill yourself.
Yep. It scared me sober. And that was the last time I drank. And that was 13 years ago.
Wow. So how did you get on not drinking? Did you just go cold turkey, or did you go?
I did go cold turkey. I went through a 12-step program, and I did that, every day for over a year, and then went to, maybe a couple times a week, 3 times a week, depending on how often I could go I cut back to once a week for, until 2019, 2020, early 2020. So
what was that with Alcoholics Anonymous, somebody like that?
Yep, exactly right.
They
saved my life.
Always, It's always funny at the end of an AA meeting, they say, right, who's coming down the pub then? See how many are tempted.
Yeah, no, it's not a good idea.
No, definitely not. So, 2019.
Yeah.
What happened at the beginning of the pandemic?
Well, I had the other part I skipped over was in 2015, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And so as I was going through treatment, my perspective on life began to change. I was diagnosed very early stage, which is unusual for ovarian cancer. And so even though I wasn't, I wasn't fighting for my life by any stretch, I still had this shift of perspective about what I was doing with my life. And at that point, I wasn't enjoying my job. And my mantra became, I didn't get sober and survive cancer to be miserable. And so I started, I've always been into self-development and, really interested in personal development and that sort of thing. And so I dove back into that pool and did a lot of reading and research, and decided that I was working with a life coach at the time, and I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And so I enrolled in life coach training in 2017 and 18. And then in 2019, I started training as an equus coach, which means using horses as co-facilitators in life coaching. And that was just fascinating, and I loved that. And so I have certifications both as a life coach and as an equus coach. And right now I'm kind of not quite on the home stretch, but getting close to getting my master facilitator certification as an equus coach, which will enable me to do workshops and retreats and that sort of thing for groups, which will be wonderful.
So tell us a little bit about this equus malarkey. So you're using nags with people to help them through tough times, is that it?
That's right. And so my my focus is helping women change their relationship with alcohol. So I try to utilize my experience and everything that I've learned, not only about coaching, but about, how I quit drinking, how I got there to begin with. And so I can help other women change their relationship with alcohol before they hit rock bottom and have a gun to their head like I did. So it's very, it's a passion project for me. It's helping shatter the stigma of alcoholism and addiction is very important to me, and normalizing not drinking. And it's so powerful when you can connect and combine the two, as far as, helping people who are struggling with this particular issue and bringing in horses to help them facilitate that. It's extraordinary. And I like to say that horses are magic, and it's an amazing process.
So what sort of horses are you using? Sort of the typical Western quarter horse to do this with?
Well, it doesn't. The breed of the horse doesn't matter really. It's just that equines, horses, are very sensitive. Because they're herd animals and they're prey animals, they're very sensitive to their surroundings, and their intuition is very heightened. And so what happens with horses is they mirror back to us the energy that we're putting out into the world. And so they can pick up on our energy. And so they know if we're not congruent between our heads and our hearts and our body and our spirit. They know if there's something off, right? So they sense that. And when they sense it, they don't trust it, because it feels, they know it's off. And so then they're reluctant to connect with us if they sense that incongruity. But when we acknowledge our truth, when we get honest with ourselves, and it doesn't matter if the honesty is a positive or a negative, it's just acknowledging the truth, then our bodies instinctively relax when we know we're onto something, right? When we know that, yes, I'm afraid of this or whatever it is. But when we acknowledge the truth, our body instinctively relaxes, and that helps the horse trust us because they can pick up on that energy. And so then they will connect with us more easily. And when they connect with us, it happens, in a lot of different ways, but and why I call it magic is because it'll just happen in the most remarkable way. Like, if your heart has been broken by somebody and you acknowledge that your heart's been broken, frequently the horse will come up and nuzzle your chest, and acknowledge that's where your pain is in your chest. And if it's magic. And I've never had a client not have a big aha when they're working with a horse. It's like, oh my God, I had no idea that was going to come up, that was going to come out, and that, the horse helped me figure that out.
So how do you go about it? Do you take people down to a stable and you show them how to use a shovel and a brush to muck out, and they're brushing horses down?
We can do that. That's part of it. if that's an experience that the client wants to have. Normally we work in a round pen. It's a 60-foot fenced area where the client can be with the horse. There's a variety of things that you can do. Grooming is one of them that they, that's one of the things that they can do. You can do anything that helps you interact with a horse where you can get honest with yourself. And that's basically what it boils down to, is you having an authentic experience alongside a horse. And it's just amazing what will come up for you when you have that energy alongside of you.
So do you have your own horses for this, or
I
do
do
you go
not.
down to the local livery?
I have a couple of ranches that I work with, and so it's very cost effective for me, not having to house a horse. They can be a little on the spendy side, and so I'm very lucky that I have facilities at my disposal that I can utilize.
So you don't want your own Mr. Ed then?
Well, it's not that I don't want one, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, but it's not feasible right now. At some point it would be lovely, but they cost a lot of money. Buying the horse is the least expensive part of owning a horse.
Absolutely.
And
vet's fees are probably the most expensive bit.
Exactly right. They're very expensive to maintain and feed, and they're a lot of work. It's hard work taking care of a horse. So, right now I'm not at the place where I can do that with ease. So it's better left to someone else.
As long as you've got a few ranches where they're happy for you to go down and.
Yep, exactly right.
I guess it's kind of a bit of free help, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. We have a good way of interacting with a horse.
Yep.
Go in that pen with a shovel.
Yeah, and all of the work is done on the ground. There's no riding involved, so you don't have to have any horse experience in order to, experience this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of fun.
It is. It is a lot of fun, and it's just.
And I guess you're in a really good area, being in Denver, because that's proper cowboy country, isn't it?
Well, a little bit, yes, but there are a lot of ranches around and horse property, so it's.
So, do you go onto these dude ranches where they sort of take you out in the Heale for a few days?
Well, I'd love to do that. I've never done it. I would love that. So, yeah, it's.
So does it involve an awful lot of sort of, you say it's all on the ground? I guess you get involved with a bit of grooming and how to put a tack on and all the rest of it, or is it just literally sort of being around the horse?
Yeah, it's just being around the horse. So, since we don't ride, I don't have to worry about saddling anybody up and, making sure that, they know what they're doing. I don't ride much. So, it's a very, freeing, there's no structure involved really. So it's really quite simple and magic.
No need for boots and spurs and chaps and a hat then? No,
you need to, closed-toed shoes are about the only requirement. So
yeah, make sure you've got steel toe caps on, because if they do happen to step on you, it hurts.
Yeah, it would hurt. It does hurt. So, and I've been fortunate. I've never been stepped on. Touch wood.
Yeah, don't get too close.
Yep, exactly right.
And always approach from the front end.
That's true. And we,
Yeah.
you know, we go over all the safety stuff, you know, before anybody gets in the round pen with a horse. And so
Yeah.
everybody knows where they can stand and where they shouldn't stand and what the consequences are going to be and so on and so forth. So it's, you know, I have yet to see anybody get injured and, you know, it happens, I'm sure. I've just never been a witness to it. So
Yeah, just ask a rodeo rider.
totally different, totally different. Yeah. Totally different scenario, but yes.
Yeah. Well, Nancy, you've come an awful long way, haven't you?
It's been a journey, that's for sure. And I'm glad to be on this side of all of it so far. And you know, I'm finally doing work that I truly love and I feel like is helping people. And it's very fulfilling for me. And it's, you know, I'm of service to others. So it's a win-win.
So where do you see yourself going in the next 5 years then?
Well, that's a good question. I hope to be conducting retreats where I get women together for a long weekend and help them really dig into whatever challenges are coming their way and have a lot of fun in the process. I work with clients one-on-one right now, and you know, we'll be doing workshops and retreats a lot more beginning in 2023, but I've got a few things coming up the late summer, early fall. And yeah, I'm looking forward to a really lovely career for the next 10 or 15 years, something like that, hopefully. As long as I can get myself to the ranch or, you know, talk to people online like you and I are talking today, I'm good. So
just take you back slightly. With your ovarian cancer, are you clear of it now?
I am. Yep. 7 years clear. And, you know, I have no reason to think that anything like that's going to ever happen again. So you know, I've put that in the rearview mirror and off we go.
Just have your regular checkups and touch wood.
Yep. Exactly right. Yep. I was
very,
very lucky.
There's an awful lot of people that aren't.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I think the key with cancer is catching it early enough.
Yep.
To be able to
exactly
treat
right.
And,
yep. I was very
lucky.
lucky.
If you suspect it, get it checked out.
That's right. That's right.
So Nancy, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to visit with your audience, and it's just been a delight.
Brilliant.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.